Worry not, vessel. 3 days here, and you'll be longing for death's sweet embrace.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Well, it turns out, in these lands, the people don't take kindly to griffins flying around. Although this one was only helping me out, he's about to feel a slight pinch. Ouch, that looks like it hurts. Turns out, falling from a griffin is bad business, and while I'm lucky to wake up on land, my friend, not so much.
Pray, keep your distance, Arisen. Worry not for me. The brine may swallow me whole, but I will not perish.
Yeah, he totally perished. But have no fear, this random guy is here to take me to a camp where this turbo hottie tells me that I need to touch a glowing stone to summon a pond because I'm the Arisen. Baby girl, I need the corn out of your turds for a meal, but rubbing shiny blue hobo rocks behind a 7-Eleven is where I draw the line. I'm a discount Triss Merigold, and what sort of Triss would I be if I didn't summon the most amazing monster hunter in the world? That's right, Geralt of Rivia. But Geralt needs some friends, so after releasing the hobo's blue rocks, I transported to the Pond Realm to pick up Giuseppe from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and a cat lady that would make any furry convention proud. Turns out, Giuseppe might have been one of those kids that took classes out in the portable classroom at school. You know, the one that isn't connected to the actual building, because this guy's as strong as an ox, but his favorite pastime is eating glue. He also perished. But as the ponds say, he f'th about and foundeth out, me lord. Welcome to the world of Dragon's Dogma 2. Before I begin with the official review, I know that the title of this video is incendiary and will make people mad, but let me set up some ground rules before you all run to the comments. This game is divisive. There are people who will play this game solely for combat and will give the game a 10 out of 10, and that's completely fine. Other people may be looking for more than that and will give a score based on other factors for what they want out of an RPG. And that's where I am. I just wanted to lay that out before I continue with this review. Many of the criticisms I'm going to level at this game come down to what I expect from an RPG, regardless of who makes it. For many people, the only thing that matters in a game is the combat, or how it plays. For me, I need a mixture of things to keep me engaged in an RPG. In no particular order, they are a good story, good loot, interesting enemies, and a good combat system. I recognize that not all of these things are as important to other people as they are to me, and that's fine. I will weigh combat more heavily because it's a large portion of this game, if not the largest portion, but there are a lot of other aspects to DD2 that I just can't ignore. With that out of the way, let me continue. Dragon's Dogma 2 is the long-awaited sequel to the cult hit Dragon's Dogma that was released back in 2012. The first game was great, but had its own share of problems, and it was reviewed fairly well. Is the second game able to take the ideas and themes of the first game and expand on them in a way that is both more exciting and engaging? Yes and no. In many cases, Dragon's Dogma 2 takes the same things that the first game had and replicates them in a more polished way. In other ways, it takes a lot of the same issues from the first game and just brings them back. This isn't all bad, as sometimes an if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach is best. But they also don't really take the stuff that was broken and fix it either. Let's talk about the good. First and foremost, the best part of this game is the combat. I know I said I'm not judging the game solely on the combat, but it's such a large portion of the title, and it's quite possibly the most intricate mechanic, that it deserves to be heavily criticized if something is wrong. If you've played the first game, there are a lot of similarities with some minor changes, but it's mostly in the quality of the combat that DD2 is different. There are familiar mechanics from the first game that are, for the most part, the same, but executed at a smoother level. There are a few hiccups in combat that are also carried over from the first game, like the camera going wonky sometimes, and climbing being a bit weird on some of the enemies, but those issues did not happen that often in my playthrough. Combat needs to be good because you'll be doing a lot of it. That's the majority of the game, really. If you don't like the combat system, you're going to have a hard time getting through this game. You can't fight enemies without a vocation or a class, and there are 6 that pawns and players can use, and then there are 4 that only the player can use. I did not get to use all of the vocations, and in my playthrough, some of them even disappeared after a certain event happened that I won't spoil. I spent a large time playing the Mage, Sorcerer, Warrior, Archer, and Mystic Spearhand. While I have my likes and dislikes for the classes that I played, Mystic Spearhand and Archer were the ones that I played the most. Each vocation has its strengths and weaknesses, and a lot of that is determined by where you are physically in a battle. Where you are in the battle can have a tactical advantage for your class, and that's something to keep in mind as you play. There's something here for almost any type of player to enjoy. I found the Mage class to be a bit boring for my taste, and really only chose it as a starting class because I made my character Triss Merigold from The Witcher. And by the way, if you want the character creation builds for Triss or Geralt, I will leave links to the YouTube videos that I copied them from because I didn't make them myself. The only real issue with character creation is that hair colors sometimes don't run the full gamut of color, which is why Triss has very dark hair because there's not a very bright red hair option. Both Mage and Sorcerer can unlock some great spells, but the playstyle of sitting in the back and casting grew a little too boring for me when I'd rather be on the front line with a sword or in the back shooting for weak spots with a bow. Climbing enemies has returned and is a fun mechanic that allows you to stab a boss in their weak spot. Bosses can be staggered and knocked down for huge damage bonuses. Elemental powers can be used to light enemies on fire, soak them in water to make electricity stronger, and there's a large amount of creativity and synergy that can be brought to the party through classes and their abilities. Each vocation has its own level, and as you level up, new abilities can be unlocked. At max level, you can find a maester of that vocation that can teach you a special mastery ultimate skill. I have very few criticisms of combat because it's really good, but let me take a look at one class that I feel has some not so great design. The Archer. I loved playing as the Archer. It's a mixture of positioning and power attacks that can stun enemies and knock them down, aiming specifically at critical spots to maximize damage. I found it to be very fun. However, one of the things about the Archer is that they use a decent amount of utility in comparison to most other classes. You can buy specialty arrows that will explode or soak your foes in waters, or tar, to let mages do a combo attack to take advantage of that. The problem is that in order to use those arrows, you have to have the appropriate skill equipped to fire that specific arrow. If you want to shoot an exploding arrow, you have to have the exploding arrow skill equipped, otherwise the exploding arrows will just sit in your inventory, taking up precious space and weight. I hate this. It's an arrow. I should just be able to equip the arrow from the inventory and use it without needing to take up a skill slot that could be used for something better. If I'm out of arrows, I now have a skill that is unusable and leaves me with only 3 skills instead of 4. It's annoying game design in my opinion, and it really makes you dedicate yourself to party synergy to make it work. So I never use those skills. Archers also have the ability to be absolutely useless against some enemy types. Slimes are unkillable unless you have a specialty arrow or some type of element cast on your bow, because slimes will just absorb your arrows. At least that's what happened to me. Saurians will just laugh off your arrows unless you hit specifically the tail or stomach, meaning you really have to aim for the weak spots while everyone else is smashing away. So either synergize with your pawns or just watch, I guess. I unfortunately never got to play as a magic archer because the quest giver for it disappeared once I hit the end game area, and so I never got it. Dragon's Dogma has an iconic mechanic in the game called pawns. These are AI characters that you can add to your party that come from beyond the rift, a spectral plane that links all worlds together. These pawns are created by other players with their own vocations and can be summoned to join your party. You have your own pawn that you create, and they are your main pawn that will always stay with you. My party typically consisted of Geralt as a warrior, some sort of a fighter, and then a mage that could heal while I floated around to different vocations. Your pawn can also join other players' parties and will return with items that other players can give to you if they were a good enough pawn. The pawns are a great system for the most part. The best part about the pawns is that they are incredible in combat. I very rarely had any issues with them doing stupid stuff or getting into too much trouble, and the AI is very good at deciding which moves to use to knock down enemies and make openings. But that's about all the good I can say for pawn AI. Outside of combat, I found the pawns to be an annoyance. While they are great for finding rift stones, treasure chests, and are usually good about being a quest guide, they mostly spout the same 3 conversations over and over. They constantly tell me about ladders and nonsense that I've already explored or read, and the worst part is how stupid they are near ledges. Pawns have a tendency to hurl themselves off of a ledge, like in the example with Giuseppe in the intro skit. I thought the problem with Giuseppe was going to be a one-off thing, but I was wrong. It happens a lot, prompting me to just have my pawns wait in an area as I explore. The problem? Certain things will negate the wait command that you can give pawns. In this instance, it was me being put to sleep that triggered them to come to me. This caused Giuseppe to fall off the cliff. They can also just fall off a cliff due to having bad pathing. If you get too far away from the pawns, they will teleport closer to you. I've had them teleport over the edge of a cliff before. You can give pawns 4 basic commands. Go, which tells the pawns to attack however they want. Wait makes the pawns stay in place. Help commands the pawns to come to you to heal or to help you. And to me tells the pawns to stay near you and follow you. The go command can also be used on a quest guide pawn to tell them to guide you to the next part of a quest, but only if they've done the quest in their own world first. This is great if you are lost on a quest and need a little help, but the problem is that this command gets interrupted by combat. Combat is a constant in this game, so your guide will be interrupted every few moments, and you'll need to constantly remind the pawn after each fight to guide you again. So guess what? You get to listen to the same dialogue about the quests over and over and over again as you give the go command. It's annoying. I've also had the AI bug out entirely where my main pawn decided to just keep falling off of a cliff to a point where I just left him behind instead of going back to revive him. It was easier to hit a rift stone than to deal with his AI. So while the AI is usually fine in combat, outside of it, I found it to be maddening. Dragon's Dogma 2 looks incredible. The world is beautiful and vibrant, it's full of life, and the design of the cities feel practical and lived in. The enemies look great, and I love the design of the end game area too. But all that life and beauty comes at the cost of frame rate. This is one of the worst parts of the game. The frame rate is fine in the woods. Usually I was getting 100 FPS or more in those areas. Once I entered a city, the game ran like Dragon's dog shit. Frames drop instantly to 40 FPS or lower, and there isn't even much going on. There's a ton of character pop in, and I have settings turned down to medium with DLSS on, set to performance mode. This is a poorly optimized game that needs updates and seems to be heavily CPU bound. Luckily, the majority of the game takes place out in the wilderness where the game sets you loose. You can go out and quest, hunt monsters, and explore all to your heart's content. If combat is the primary pillar of DD2, then exploration is the secondary, and there's a ton to discover. The developers have lovingly crafted this world, and I feel like I only ever just saw a small fraction of it. There are pathways, caves, and buildings to explore, and the game gets even bigger once you make it to the end game. This is great, because the sense of scale here is enormous and only gets bigger. However, unlike what many other reviewers have said, I was not totally thrilled with the rewards for exploration. There are many chests and crates to uncover, but the majority are filled with garbage, and at some point I stopped looting basic crates. One of the biggest problems with DD2 is that I spend almost as much time managing my inventory as I do actually exploring the map. There is a weight system to the inventory and how much you can hold. I found that as I played, there was no point in looting everything, because if you take on too much weight, it affects things like running speed and stamina regeneration. I was constantly spending time in my inventory, moving and shuffling items around from person to person. I hate this in video games, and if I modded the game, this would be the first thing that I would remove. But on top of that, the majority of what you find is mostly useless stuff, depending on the type of player that you are. I'm not doing a lot of crafting in this game. I don't really care for their system, so I stopped opening basic crates and only opened the treasure chests. Even then, most of the loot was still garbage. There are good items in the world, and some are only found in those chests, but those items are few and far between. Most of the gear and items that I found could just be bought at the merchant stalls. They were really only good for either making me money or saving me money by not having to buy that item. Gear is pretty good for the most part. I've looked up the different armors and weapons for the classes that I liked, and I even got the best armor for the Mystic Spearhand at the end of the game, and almost all of it looks pretty good. The art style is a little less huge hulking fantasy World of Warcraft style of armor and a little more subdued with a mix of realism and fantasy, and it works here, but I would have liked some weapons that were a little more glowing with energy and stuff. There are some weapons that have built-in elemental stuff so they do glow, but I kinda would have liked a little more. That's not to say that some armors aren't ridiculous looking, but mostly that's the end game gear. Exploration does have a certain level of good rewards though. Some quests can only be found by exploring, and I ran into the Sphinx just by looking around. In my opinion, her questline of solving her riddles was the best quest in the game, which brings me to my next topic, the story. It's really bad. The side quests? Also not great. The main thrust of the story is that there is a fake arisen sitting on the throne that can supposedly control pawns as well. Your goal is to figure out who they are and the conspiracy behind them. The story spirals out of control into some stupid and weird esoteric BS that only gets more confusing because everyone talks in pseudo ye olde English. The story isn't told in a way that is interesting, and many of the beginning missions are supposedly stealth missions in a game with no stealth mechanic. The quest giver tasks you with sneaking into certain areas of the palace, but there's no sneaking mechanic. The only guards that ever attacked me were in the dungeon of Vermund, and even that took a lot of coercing. It seemed like most guards were on a timer mechanic where they would only come after you if you were near them for a certain amount of time while in a restricted area. Otherwise, they always just walked past me without a care. The actual conspiracy and resulting story is told in a very rushed and sort of disjointed way, with characters not really explaining what they are doing adequately. They expect you to form emotional connections with characters that haven't had time to develop in any way. This is because people in this game are just quest givers and not actual characters. The endgame story kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's just a big meh for me. It's also very easy to miss the true ending of the story and just assume the game is over because there's very little explanation as to what is going on. The story is probably the worst part of the game outside of performance, and it only got worse for me because at a certain point I gave up caring about playing and just wanted to finish. That point was shortly after I crossed the line between Vermund and Batal. You see, while combat is great, the game seems to never want you to go too far without engaging in it. You will be constantly fighting small groups of enemies and bosses as you travel. I have no real complaints with the enemies themselves, although the variety does start to grow stale after a while. Most enemies are just recolored versions of the basic ones and maybe do a different status effect. The issue was that when I entered Batal and tried to make my way to the capital of the land, the clustering of enemies, both the small variety and a boss variety, was so dense I got bored of combat and stopped caring about the game. The main mechanic of the game grew dull to me because they overdid it with crowded spawn density and a high spawn rate. I had one quest from the capital that made me find an oracle. Said oracle was only realistically a 10-minute run away. It took me 40 minutes because of all the enemies. In that time, I fought a multitude of small enemies, a griffin, 4 cyclops, an ogre, 2 golems, and a drake. All I wanted was to talk to a woman in a hut, and it was like fighting off a horde of Taylor Swift fans at a meet and greet for T-Swizzle. All that just for the Oracle to tell me to go back to the capital. I was done, dude. Look, I love cake. I'm a fatty, but if all I ever eat is cake, then I will get sick of it. Combat's like cake. It's wonderful, but there was just so much of it in an unrelenting way that I got bored of it. It even happens when you sleep at camps. You'll wake up the next day, heck sometimes in the middle of the night, to fight a group of enemies. It grew unbearable, and I hit a point where I just wanted to finish the game. The big set piece boss fights though, chef's kiss. The giant statue was a highlight. It got to a point where I would make my pawns wait in an area as I ran through it, past all the enemies, and then called the pawns to me because I knew that they would teleport instead of run through it all. That's not something I should be doing in a game like this. The devs made a big deal of pointing out that there was very little fast travel in the game, but honestly, I think I would have preferred it after a point. Fast travel is limited to certain places that have what are called port crystals, and you need a resource called fairy stones in order to travel to the port crystal. Port crystals are only in certain areas of the world, and you can place a portable one anywhere you want, but only up to a certain amount. So fast travel does exist, but in a fairly limited way. I've never been a fan of backtracking through the same areas over and over in games, and if I experienced it once or twice, that's fine, but you'll experience areas a multitude of times because traveling is a huge part of the game. But monster density also made general traveling on foot a chore. There are ox carts that you can take that will get you between major cities, but like with camping, the trip can be interrupted by monsters. Lastly, I want to address the microtransactions that were in the store at launch. They are stupid. I made a whole video talking about them that you can watch. They are useless items that can all be found easily in-game with exception to maybe 3 things. Don't buy them, don't engage with them, don't give Capcom your money. They were probably created by the same idiot that decided a game shouldn't have a new game option at launch. Unacceptable. Also, the game does have de novo, so take that as you will. I know for some people having de novo is a deal breaker, so just understand that that's a thing. Dragon Dogma 2 has a lot going for it, and I know that this review is going to be divisive. I look at games as a whole, and I can't just ignore certain aspects of a game, let alone an RPG, simply because combat is good. Personally, I need more to really engage in a game like this. If you don't, and the combat is all you need, then that's fine, and your opinion is valid. I still haven't decided on how I want to address games on this channel, if I want to give them a score, or just let the review lie. But I'll leave that up to you all in the comments. If you got this far, I want to thank you for listening to me ramble and grumble through all this stuff. I liked Dragon's Dogma 2 for the most part, even with my criticisms, and combat holds the game up. But if a 5 out of 10 is average, then this is a 6 out of 10 RPG for me. It's just above average, with combat and exploration making up the majority of that score. The rest is painfully below average for me, and the poor performance, terrible story, and repetitive enemies that are so densely packed really hurt the game for me. But that's just my opinion. Sound off in the comments down below how you think I'm wrong or right, and I'll see you all in the next one.